So typography in Photoshop has gotten a lot better than it used to be. Um, One thing to remember though is that Photoshop is an image editing program. It's not designed to be a page layout program or a word processor. If you want to use a lot of text in a document, I would recommend using InDesign or Illustrator. But for small amounts of text, Photoshop is really strong. So let's go ahead and jump into creating a new document. So we're going to go File, New, and I want you to make an 800 width pixels by 800 height pixels, 72 resolution RGB color mode document. I'm going to create this. And let's go ahead and open our Layers panel. Go Window, Layers. I'm going to close my swatches for now. And I want you to navigate over to your toolbar, and I want you to find the type tool and expand this tool. So in the type tool, you've got a horizontal type tool and a vertical type tool. And these are the two tools that we're going to focus on today. So let's first grab our horizontal type tool. And I want you to click and type the word vector. My type is actually quite large right now. And notice after I finish typing this word vector, in my layers panel, I now have a new layer. It's a type layer, and I know this because it has a letter T associated with it. So this indicates a text layer. And the word that I wrote, vector, is in there. So that's really helpful. So go ahead and grab your type tool again, and let's type the word raster. I'm going to click my move tool, and then move raster underneath. So I have two type layers now. I have one that's called raster and one called vector. And then the next thing I want you to do is I want you to use the horizontal type tool again. And this time, instead of just clicking and typing, first I want you to create a text box, very much like Illustrator or InDesign. And the way that you do this is you click, oops, I didn't want to activate that layer. I'm going to click a little lower and drag, and you'll see it's creating this marching ants. This is the size of my text box. So I've clicked and dragged, and then I'm releasing my mouse, and I'm going to click within this box, and I'm going to write, why isn't it working? Let's try again. Click and drag. I think it's because my type is too big. Yeah, there we go. All right, let me do this again. So if your type is too big, your text box isn't going to work properly. So I'm going to go up here and change my point size to something a little more reasonable, like 16 point. And let me delete these text boxes really quick. I'm going to show you again. All right, so I'm going to click my horizontal type tool, and I'm going to click and drag, and it's still filling in a really large text. So I'm going to go up here to my point size, and I'm going to change it to 16, 18 point maybe. With my type tool, I'm going to click within this text box and highlight this copy. I'm going to type the words, I can create a paragraph of text. I'm going to do this a couple times. I'm going to copy it and paste, 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 paste. So you guys can see paragraph of text. All right, so you should have a vector layer, a raster layer, individual letters, and then you should have a paragraph. And notice this paragraph type layer, you can kind of see the repetition of this copy that I have. Type layers, like any type of layer, you can change and shift around and prioritize. So I'm going to do vector, raster, and then my paragraph, very much like I have on my image. All right, so I want to go over a couple of panels with you. The first one is the character panel. So if you go to Window, Character, right here, you're going to open up the character panel. And the character panel is repeated along the top of your Photoshop if you have the type tool selected. So you'll see in my character panel, I have control over, trying to make this a little bigger, maybe it won't let me, a couple of things. So I'm going to highlight vector, and you'll see here I have control over my font. So I'm able to change my font quickly and easily. And I have a lot of fonts. It's okay if you don't. So maybe I'll choose something that's a little bit more, a little different so you can see. So you have your control over your font. So this is called Acrobat. You have control over the font weight. So this is the text solid or the text noir. You have control over the size, the point size. So this is quite large. You can either type in the different point size. I think it only goes up to default to 72. So you can change the point size. And then here we get into three things that is more of a graphic design tool, but I think it's helpful to know. You also have control over the tracking. And what tracking is the space between each letter. So you have control over the tracking. So the tracking is right here, this little VA. You'll see it's set at 50 right now. So the bigger the tracking, the more space. The less tracking, the tighter it is. So go ahead and just kind of play around and see the difference between like 200, which is really spaced out, or 100, which can be helpful if you've got a font that's really loose or tight. So you have control over that. So that's tracking. And then you also have control over something called kerning, which is just the individual space between the letters. So say, for example, I think the space between this E and this C is there's too much space, and I just want to tighten the space between the E and the C. I can go over here to this little icon that says the V and the A, and I can change the spacing just between this E and the C. So for example, if I go to -100, you'll see it tightens up the E and the C, or if I want to make it looser, I can go all the way out, or I can go back to 0 for default. So that's the big one, is the difference between the kerning and the tracking. Tracking is the space between all the letters. It'll change it at the same time, or kerning is the space between individual layers. So just kind of a fun option to know in your character panel. Another thing that I want to go over in the character panel has to do with the leading. And leading has to do with the space between lines of text. So if I want to go ahead and activate my paragraph text, say I think the space between these lines of text is too tight, I'm able to change the leading. So I'm going to go ahead and make it 18 point. I can tighten it, or if I go a little bit higher, I can loosen it. So that's something good to know too. They call this the leading in graphic design. Okay, so we went over the ability to change the font, remember? So I can change this to my other favorite, which is Universe. The weight, so I can make this bold if I want, or I can go back because it's too big. Go back to condensed, just fun. You have control over the tracking. I'm going to make it a little bit tighter. And then also the kerning. So I'm going to make the space between this R and this A a little bit bigger. It's a little too tight. You can get really crazy with this when you're a graphic designer. It's fun. And then also, remember, you can change the leading, which is the space between lines of text. So I'm going to make this just a little bit tighter. The last thing that I want to show you, the other has to do with the paragraph panel. So we went over character, and I want to talk to you about the paragraph panel. So you guys probably all recognize this. This is very much like any word processing document where you have control over whether your type is left justified, centered, right justified, and then of course you have all this justified type, which can be kind of where it means that there's no that it aligns perfectly on the left and the right. There's no rag, like you have here. This is a rag on the right side of cut. When you do justified completely, it makes the type equal on the left and the right. There's no rag. All right, so go ahead and leave this example open for our next exercise.